All right, well, thank you, Ron. To your point, my colleagues and I are here to talk about the sort of inner workings of the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, if you will. The Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, as Gareth mentioned, is the bringing together of a bunch of Microsoft technology. In particular, technology we have in Azure, technology we have in the Power Platform, technology we have in Dynamics 365, and technology we have in Microsoft 365 with tools like Teams and other things. So I know there's a presentation on some of the Teams integration later, so Eden, Rebecca, and I are going to focus on Azure, Dynamics, and the Power Platform, and talk a little bit about how these things actually work to enable some of the scenarios that we've been talking about and what we've been doing, and how some of these real-world scenarios, like what you heard in the previous session, where Holly was showing some of the things that were done to solve problems for Swedish, how they will evolve over time based on new technologies and new capabilities we're bringing. Gareth mentioned earlier the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare is really targeted around a set of scenarios, and I've added a fourth one here that Gareth didn't have on his presentation, only to sort of talk about the importance of it, which is we want to enhance patient engagement through new technologies that enable patients to be more in control of their care and their information, as well as give providers and payers more ability to connect to their patients and share that data and information with them. We want to enable better health team collaboration through connecting the different payers, providers, clinicians, specialists who participate in the care of patients, and making sure that they can both share data with each other, but also connect and communicate with that patient as well. And then using that data, it would be outstanding if we could improve clinical and operational insights for these providers and payers. In other words, enable them to see more and gain more insight from the data that's at their disposal, rather than just using it only for the immediate care of a patient, but actually improve care over time at scale for the whole population. In doing so, protecting health information is paramount. I think everybody on the call knows this. I don't think I have to spend very much time on this, but this is some of the most sensitive data there is, and it is important that we constantly remind ourselves as we build these technologies the importance of the safety, security, and privacy of this information. It's absolutely critical. Gareth mentioned a number of scenarios, 9 different scenarios that we're focused on in the first release of the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare. And I'm not going to spend a bunch of time going into each one of these, but what I do want to do, and I wanted to kind of bring this up as a little bit of a "you are here" slide, a "you are here" map, to remind us what we're talking about. These 9 different applications and scenarios, and what they mean in terms of how they come to market and how you will use them. The things that we're going to talk about today, particularly the technologies we're building in Azure specifically for healthcare, the things we're building in Dynamics specifically for healthcare, and how we're enabling the Power Platform to lend itself to these healthcare scenarios, that encompasses all of these things. And you don't really map one of these technologies to one of these scenarios. These technologies are the underlying engine that power these scenarios. But I just kind of wanted to remind us of why we're here and what we're talking about. In addition to that, many of you may already know this, but there is a mandate now in the United States anyway to implement a certain set of technologies on a schedule that is, the clock is ticking. The clock started ticking on June 30th of this year. And there is deadlines for implementing different technologies, primarily centered around patient access to data and the availability of data for care. In other words, sharing the data between providers and between payers for the benefit of the care of a patient. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time digging into this, but as we think about some of these technologies, we also recognize the need to solve for some of these problems and how we're going to solve for them. So there's things we're doing that lend themselves more to user-facing applications like patient engagement and care. And then there's things we're doing to enable the underlying technology in health IT to meet the requirements and compliance needs of the underlying platform. The Office of the National Coordinator and CMS have proposed a set, or they had proposed a set of rules. Those rules are now finalized, and that's the schedule you saw on the previous slide. What that really means for patients is an improved access to their records, improved protection of their privacy as their data is shared, sort of the promise of what the Portability Act was all about. For providers, that really means making sure patients have access to their data in a way that is suitable for the patient, that they should be able to have some choice in how they get access to that data and what they do with it. For those of you on the meeting who are developers or part of a health IT organization, the API conditions for certification to ensure CMS reimbursement and things like that become important to you. And for payers, there's some immediate deadlines coming up in January around providing patient access and provider directory APIs, things that you would have to publish that would give programmatic access to this data. These things are tremendously important, and they're based on standards in the emerging in the industry. So as we approach these problems, and this isn't sort of a linear approach, we came at these things from all different directions. But as we approach these problems, we really look at, from a cloud platform standpoint, how do we support both the 9 different applications and sets of scenarios that we want to enable at the sort of point of care, if you will, as well as how do we enable the underlying technology platform to meet the compliance requirements and needs of health IT. And so we look first to industry standards for health data. And in this case, the emerging and now becoming more formalized standard for healthcare data is the FHIR standard, the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources Standard. So we look to that standard and say, let's meet the healthcare industry where they are by enabling and embracing the FHIR standard and making our technology understand FHIR. But then also let's connect that FHIR data to other systems and make that more easier for people to connect and use that data. So we'll talk about how we do that as well. Secondly, ensuring that we can securely manage that PHI data. As I mentioned, this is paramount. This is a must. And so making sure that these things that we build not only adhere to all the requirements, but we actually certify them according to whatever certifications are relevant in the region they're in. For the United States, things like high trust certification, ISO certification, FedRAMP certification for government use, these are all critical. And then lastly, how do we then enable you to, as you bring your data into these systems, accelerate what you're able to do with that data through machine learning, through artificial intelligence, through analytics, through connecting it to these sort of systems of intelligence and systems of engagement. From the Azure side of the house, and I'll talk first about the Azure platform, and then we'll connect that. We'll show how we connect that to the Dynamics platform, and I'll hand it over to Rebecca, and then Rebecca will hand it over to Eden to talk about how the Power Platform plays into this as well. So how we do this in Azure is through something called the Azure API for FHIR. This is how we approach this problem. We said, how do we make our sort of developer cloud, our platform cloud, speak the language of healthcare? And we embrace the FHIR standard, and we basically said, let's build an API into Azure that understands the FHIR standard and understands health data and can ingest and manage and work with that data. I'm not going to spend much time on FHIR, but just for if there's 1 or 2 people, excuse me, on the call who've never heard of FHIR, this is essentially what it is. It's a specification, much like USB is a specification for the interoperability of multimedia devices. FHIR is a specification for the interoperability of health data. And it's sort of graph-like in nature, but we won't spend a lot of time here. We have a lot to get through today. The way we think about this problem from a platform standpoint is, and as we look at the diagram, on the left, you have many different sources of data generators. This could be the electronic health record. This could be a PAC system with imaging data. Maybe it's some billing data, some CRM data, IoT devices bringing in real-time data, whatever it is. The idea is that we don't necessarily want to replace those systems because those systems provide a particular set of functionality designed for their purpose. What we want is to create a digital reflection of that data in the cloud, much like Holly and Darren were talking about, sort of bringing that data out of those transactional systems and into something where you could work with it in a different way. We want to create this digital reflection of that data in the cloud. And we do that by sort of ingesting and maybe enriching that data along the way. We persist it in tools that are designed for health data. We enable the querying and provisioning of that data through systems that are designed for healthcare. And then we connect it to systems of intelligence and ultimately connect it to the point that the user will interact with that data, whether that's through Dynamics, through the Power Platform, or through EHR integration with Smart on FHIR capabilities or some of these other things. And so I kind of want to just talk through some of this real quickly, and then I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca. So the center of this is the Azure API for FHIR. And some of you may have heard that when we announced the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, we also announced the open source implementation of what we call the Medical Imaging Server for DICOM. This is a DICOM web API and server that runs in Azure. It's open source, it's on GitHub. This is how my team ships products. We ship as open source first, and then we take a distribution of that open source and we ship it as a first-party Azure service. So you can always see exactly what we're doing. We're working on open standards, so we want to be very transparent. This is the center. This is where the data sort of comes in and resides, and we sort of persist this digital reflection of the data. The way that data comes in can happen in a number of ways. It can either be data coming in straight through the FHIR APIs, FHIR data into a FHIR server, DICOM data into a DICOM server, or it could be IoT data coming in real time, and we have an IoT connector that transforms that telemetry stream into FHIR observations and puts it into the FHIR server. It could be clinical notes coming in through the new service we have coming out called Text Analytics for Health, where we can segment and classify clinical notes and then ultimately transform that data into FHIR and put it in into the service. And if you have legacy data like HL7B2 data or CDA data, we have a FHIR converter tool that enables you to convert those formats into FHIR data, much like a HDMI to USB converter would do. Once you get that data in, then you have the ability to query and provision it. We've introduced new capabilities through an open source project called the FHIR Tools for Anonymization that we've already started to integrate into our first-party managed service through the ability to de-identify data on export. So you have the ability to export data from the FHIR server, and in the process, you can de-identify it according to a configuration that you decide on. So you can implement the safe harbor rules of redaction, or you can create some different rules of your own on how you want to maybe date shift or encrypt data to de-identify it for whatever use you have, whatever secondary use you want to use that data for. And then as we think about intelligence and how we connect to these other systems, and this is to me a little bit where the magic of the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare happens, because on its own, these tools in Azure are very powerful and they'll help you with your ability to adhere to the ONC rules and your ability to adhere to the CMS rules. And so on their own, they're quite powerful. And you can connect this data, you can de-identify, you can export, you can connect to Azure Machine Learning, you can connect to Azure Synapse Analytics, you can do all these things that give you a lot of power in what you can do with this data and build your own solutions. But the magic of the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare is when we start to integrate these tools together. And so we've built a couple things. One of them we released back in February, which is the Power BI FHIR connector. So you can actually open up Power BI desktop, point it at our FHIR server, and pull that health data into the Power BI environment and start to work with it right there in that environment, which is amazingly powerful when it comes to doing some analysis on the health data that you're collecting and what you're working with, and using it in tools that you already know how to use. But what we have coming as part of the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare is what we're at least tentatively referring to as the FHIR CDS Sync Agent. Now, Holly mentioned all the data that they were working with was going into CDS, which then makes it available for Power Apps and Power Automate, and it makes it available in Dynamics and these other tools. So the ability to bring FHIR data into Azure to use for all these different use cases, but then also to connect that data to CDS and make that data available in these other platforms is tremendously powerful. And so I'm gonna hand it off now. I've kind of expired my time talking about this, and there's a lot more we can spend talking about it, but I really want you to see what can be done with this data when you start to connect it into these other tools. And so I'm gonna hand it over to Rebecca to take control. I'm gonna turn off my camera and she's gonna take charge and talk about what we can do with this data.
Thank you so much, Doug. Sound check, am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Rebecca Crow. I am the Business Applications Director for U.S. Healthcare. Happy to talk with you all today. And really, now that we've walked through the architecture for data interoperability and what we are thinking and how we're helping our customers unlock data in a secure and compliant way, what we're going to shift to is really talking about the business outcomes and what are the ways we can help organizations transform and build new health and wellness ecosystems. Especially with the new reality we're all experiencing, we're finding many healthcare organizations are looking for ways to modernize and really provide a connected experience to the patients and the community they serve. To provide an illustrative example, we're going to follow a quick story about Mary, who is a patient who has been dealing with some health challenges. She's been admitted to the hospital 7 times in the last year. She's had some very short readmission timeframes. She's missed a few of her appointments, and she's really identified as high risk. So as a health system, we're really trying to track what's happening with Mary and help, ensure she's taking care of herself and has the resources she needs. But if we look at the current state of the health system and the resources available to Mary, they are very disconnected, and that creates confusion a lot of times for that particular patient. In the case of Mary, she's looking for a better understanding of, cost transparency and how do I navigate, these specialists and really understand what will it cost at the end of the day. She's also looking for, a clinic to get a flu shot, how to schedule her next appointment with her specialist, but ultimately, looking for ways to have better control of her health care and get on the right track. Again, today, her data, it resides in EMRs, in multiple systems. It resides in her pharmacies and retailers and benefits managers, and it's very hard as that individual to control, have that full picture, and it's also hard for her care team. They also have a disconnected representation of Mary's health. And when we think about when Mary is trying to navigate care and really decide where she's going to get healthcare services, she has a lot of options. And so, she is trying to navigate where to go, but this is also creating an impact on health systems, where they're trying to help support not only the reactive care that Mary needs, but also take care of her long-term needs to get her back on track for better health, which would require continuous contact and really having a way to interact with Mary outside of reactive care. And so, that's really, I think, the challenge that many health systems are facing today. And, that's really the goal of what we're, looking forward to helping our healthcare customers and organizations with this, reinvention of how we stay connected and creating an integrated platform so that you can create that consumer experience that, represents not only your brand, but also helps to create better outcomes, which is, the most important thing for your health population. And, the way it seems in some cases like a daunting task, but that's really where I think when we looked at our vision for Microsoft Cloud for Health and the challenge of data interoperability, ultimately we want to make it easier to create connected experiences with a healthcare consumer engagement platform. And we want to do that in a way that also unlocks artificial intelligence and in a way that we're managing data securely and managing compliance and taking some of the uncertainty out of how we manage data and the data strategy. And then finally, this challenge has been a challenge for many organizations because it can seem like a large enterprise transformation, which it is, but really having a transformational roadmap that helps to catalyze new experiences quickly is what we're seeing as a successful strategy to move forward with this transformation in a way that you can rapidly see impact in the most significant areas of your business. And so, kind of looking back at the technology and the technology stack, as Doug walked through the path for data exchange and interoperability that starts within Azure FHIR, the Microsoft Cloud for Health is really a connected experience that allows us to interact and unlock that data in a way that you can now have pre-built experiences that makes it easy for you to help really drive that quick win, rapid innovation within your health system. And when we think about the platform strategy, again, we're thinking end-to-end security and compliance. We're thinking about how do we help with the challenge of interoperability, but also, how do we create the consumer experience and that platform that unlocks a variety of scenarios. You've heard about some of the scenarios that Swedish deployed with the Power platform, and Eden's going to go through a couple examples with that as well. But this is all the same platform, and it allows you to really customize experiences that are predictive and proactive for the members and patients that you serve. And so, beyond the technology, we're really trying to think about how do we make this real and how do we help provide a blueprint for success? And really, the way we are thinking about it is, you've got a data challenge, and we're going to really start with how do we aggregate that data and come up with a way to serve that up and curate it so that you can do something and take action, and so that everybody that's in your health system that interacts with your patient and population has access to the same insights and can be responsive and predictive and proactive, so that we're not just dealing with those moments where we're dealing with reactive care, but we're able to be proactive. We're able to offer wellness programs. We're able to track in the home remote patient monitoring in a way that we can better manage chronic diseases and chronic conditions. And we can provide new services ultimately that help drive new sources of revenue and new service lines to your patients and consumers in a way that you might be providing now virtual health. But the whole Microsoft Cloud for Health platform is just the starting point for making it easier to unlock these scenarios and have a fully connected experience across the continuum of care. And so, the third thing to think about if you're embarking on this journey to really, start digital transformation in a way that you want to create your connected consumer experience, the third thing to really consider is, you are going to create a framework and a mechanism to have a continuous digital feedback loop between all of the points of care in the care journey, including ways to better improve care team collaboration, clinician satisfaction, and ease of managing this data challenge we have. And you're also going to have a way to start to drive rapid innovation to support quick business outcomes. So it doesn't have to be a daunting enterprise journey anymore. You're in a position where you can drive, those immediate needs quickly. And that is exactly what we're seeing across the healthcare industry at this time, where innovation is so critical to stay connected with your patients and really, make sure we can manage their outcomes in a remote and virtual way. And Microsoft has been working with many healthcare systems in the US and really trying to meet them where they are in this journey. And just a few examples where our healthcare systems are looking at making changes. We've seen some really great advancements with Johns Hopkins and what they're doing with precision medicine, and really kind of taking those care plans and looking for new ways to think about treating patients for better outcomes. We are, partnering with the Cleveland Clinic, who really, with the pandemic had to start looking at ways to really stay connected with their patients and make sure they felt safe to come back and really schedule those non-essential procedures and ensure that they have a really deep connection with the community they serve. And that was, an urgent scenario that drove rapid success. And we've also talked about Swedish, which is part of Providence, who has also worked to, look at ways to not only streamline the patient concierge service and stay connected to their community, but also, respond very quickly to some of the new challenges we were facing around tracking PPE and other, resources, so that they had that data and insight at their fingertips. So that's just a little bit of the journey on the business outcomes that some of our largest health systems are driving, and how the Microsoft Cloud for Health is making it easier to quickly unlock data and intelligent insights to take action and create new experiences for your community. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Eden, who's going to walk through a little bit more of an example of how this can come to life. Hi, Eden, we don't hear you. Eden, we still don't have any sound, I'm sorry. Not yet.
We can see your smiling face, but we can't hear you. You know, it's always challenging when you've got GoToWebinar, Teams, all these different platforms to make sure that the microphones and speakers are all correctly configured.
Absolutely. And I had my lawn crew drive by, so I had to find a really quiet corner to sneak away to.
Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yes, finally. So hi, everyone. My name is Eden Porsangi. I'm a technical specialist here at Microsoft, and I focus on Teams, but specifically Power Platform within Teams. So let's go ahead and get started. So actually, if you don't mind going back to the, well, that's okay. We can keep it on this screen. Did you know that in the next 5 years, there's going to be more applications built than in the last 40 years? Even if customers want to hire more developers, they can't. They can't solve digital problems fast enough. There's a huge demand, there's huge gaps, and developers just need to work quicker. Therefore, 65% of applications are going to move to low code. So you might be asking, well, what's Microsoft's response to that? Well, Microsoft's response to that is the Power Platform. The Power Platform essentially is a variety of different applications that help with all kinds of various business needs. We start with Power BI, which is essentially an enterprise reporting solution, but it also allows any user to be a business analyst. You can create reports, you can create dashboards, and share and collaborate along with the rest of the organization. We also have Power Apps, which is a low-code, no-code application development solution. So if you essentially know how to use PowerPoint and Excel, you can build your own application. We also have Power Automate, which is our workflow automation tool. Not only is Power Automate a workflow automation tool, but we've also introduced some robotic process automation capabilities. So all those tedious processes that were very time-consuming can all be automated with robotic process automation. We also have Power Virtual Agents, and Power Virtual Agents essentially allows anybody to be able to create a chatbot. So we've got various standard topics that you can leverage and triggers, and you can essentially, create a chatbot within minutes. For those citizen developers that want to be able to build a data model, but they don't know where to go or how to start, our answer to that is the Common Data Service. The Common Data Service can be tweaked for your organization, and you can customize entities, you can create fields and so on. And once that Common Data Service data model is created, you can leverage it over and over again throughout the Power Platform. We also have a variety of data connectors that you can leverage. And being Microsoft as we are, we have a ton of AI capabilities that we've also incorporated with the Power Platform. So you can do things like mixed reality and so on, with Power Apps and Power Automate as well. So Power Apps is essentially a low-code approach to building applications. You can build web applications, you can build mobile applications, and we've got 350 pre-built connectors that you can leverage throughout the platform. We're continuously adding connectors, and if we don't have one, that's okay. You can create your own custom connector. You can even connect to on-premise data sources. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got that AI capability that you can leverage with the Power Platform. You can use things like forms processing, object detection, and so on. And you know, we've also put together our Center of Excellence toolkit. So if you want to be able to govern the Power Platform, we've provided you with we have the tools for you to be able to do so. So Power Automate is super easy to use and it's very quick to start. Essentially with Power Automate, there's three basic building blocks. You can automate tasks by leveraging triggers, actions, as well as conditional logic. We also have a flow checker, so if you wanted to be able to determine if there's any errors in your design, you can do that as well. We have the ability for you to do testing out your flows within real time. And then we also have so many templates that are available that you can leverage. I suggest anyone take a quick look at all the different templates. You can even use them for personal use. So now, what I'd like to talk about very quickly here is some of the different capabilities that you can leverage with the Power Platform, but within Microsoft Teams. So if you haven't used Teams in the past, Teams is essentially a hub for teamwork. We bring together everything that a team needs, whether it's chat or conversations, but it's also meetings, video conferencing, and so on. The great thing about Teams is that you can leverage what we discussed in terms of the Power Platform right within Teams. And what we're doing is we're seeing a lot of our healthcare customers use Teams for the purposes of virtual rounding. So if you wanted to have visits with your patients or, there's some in-room virtual visit devices and so on. And I'm actually going to show you guys an example of that. So I'd like to introduce you to Sid. Sid is a registered nurse for Foster Memorial Hospital. And like many nurses, he has a lot of challenges. And some of those challenges that he has are what we're going to show you in terms of how Microsoft is going to help with those specific challenges. So you're going to see how Sid essentially reviews his triage list of patients, how he locates recommended equipment, how he reviews patient charts at a glance. He performs virtual rounds via telehealth, and then he also can reach out to the care team if he needs to do so. So, using Power Apps, which is an application building platform, right? Clinical teams can launch, Power Apps within days without even having any coding knowledge. Sid is able to get a list of triage list of patients. Can we move the slide forward if that's okay? Thank you. So, Sid essentially is able to get a triage list of patients that he has to see. And with Microsoft's artificial intelligence capabilities, the patient's information is retrieved from the electronic health record, and it's triaged by a risk score. So this way, Sid knows which high-risk patients he should see first. So if you take a quick look here, you'll see that Sid has the most important information about Frank. Frank Allen is a COVID patient, and he has hypertension. Now, what equipment is necessary to be able to treat Sid? Previously, Sid would probably have had to have spent 20 minutes, maybe even longer, to track down information for each patient, maybe up to 3 hours in a given day. In this specific case, with one click, our AI capabilities can not only identify what equipment is needed for a patient based on their diagnosis, but also where that equipment is. So here, this is made possible by the combination of IoT medical devices and intelligent sensors and cameras. So if you take a look at this Power App, you'll see that Sid is able to determine exactly where the equipment is that he needs for Frank. And you can also see that not only does Sid know where the available equipment is, but if the equipment is unavailable, he can also there's also going to be recommended alternatives that exist that he can leverage instead. So once he's able to gather the equipment needed, he can then proceed to meet with Frank. So Let's take a look at the patient profile. You'll see here that the most important medical information is right in the center of the app. So in this specific scenario, you can see that, Frank has his most recent readings up on the screen. So as a COVID patient, it's super important for Sid to be aware of what Frank's overall temperature is, as well as his blood oxygen levels. So that's what's front and center. Secondly, Frank's overall risk score is also shown. So that shows information in terms of like why he's in the risk band that he's in. So in Frank's case, his risk factor is COVID-19, and he also has hypertension, and he's a little bit older in age. So this can obviously, could lead to worsening symptoms of COVID. So now, if you take a look in the center of the screen, you'll see that, in the past, Sid might have had to have looked for sticky notes or paper that's left over from a previous nurse or so on. But here you'll see in the center that Jasmine, the previous rounding nurse, has left a message within the app for Sid. And that message is essentially sharing all the most, important medical information, or maybe even some personal information about Frank. So this makes it so much easier for Sid, and it makes his job a lot easier. Now, towards the right hand of the screen, you'll see that, there's also a lot of information in here in terms of medical history or medication history. So for example, Sid can quickly determine what type of medication Frank has taken. He also, towards the far right, is able to see, some information in terms of like any type of potential drug interactions or concerning trends that are shown from connected device readings. So Sid can take notes on these recommendations within the EMR notes section, and he also has the ability to look at this embedded Power BI dashboard right in the center of the screen. And then there he's able to see the current connected device readings, any type of historical information from the EMR. And it's all very easy for Sid to see. So Sid can very quickly determine if there's any overall patterns, if Frank is moving in the right direction. Now, if Sid has any questions about Frank's history, towards the right of the screen, you'll see there's a virtual nurse. So he can ask the nurse, any type of questions, using natural language, like things about Frank's medical history, or maybe, like when was his last fever? When was the highest reading? Essentially, instead of having to dig through the medical record, the virtual nurse can answer all of those questions for him. So with this solution, we're able to see how Sid, the handoffs between Jasmine and Sid are relatively easy because they're all within this patient profile. We can see how AI powers some of those recommendations from the previous nurse notes and so on, so that Sid can very easily take over and start caring for Frank. So now Sid also works from home for a couple of days of the week. And using Microsoft Teams, Sid has access to all kinds of various care coordination and collaboration capabilities throughout the hospital. So he has access to various exam rooms, any room that essentially has Teams installed and is available for patients. He's able to get access to that. He also has access to patients that are not in the hospital, but maybe at home through home care rounding. So Sid will take a quick look at the exam rooms and see if there's need of a visit. So as he's doing that, he takes a look and he sees that there is a patient who has COVID who's in need of assistance. So he essentially begins a chat with the patient. So if you take a look here, you'll see that he's initiated the chat. He's having a conversation with the COVID patient who is at home. Now, if you take a look here, you'll also see that this app is the same app that he used previously. The difference here is that it's within Teams. So essentially, Eden is at home and, she's leveraging some of the monitoring devices that were discharged with Sid that Sid can connect to remotely, and he can see all of Eden's readings. So he can note some of the changes, perhaps in her readings, and maybe he needs to escalate that to her physician. If he wants to escalate that to the physician, he can essentially chat with the physician and let them know what's going on with Eden. So here, essentially, the physician can see Eden's, medical chart within Teams and, perhaps take the next step in developing a care plan for her. So let's summarize everything that you saw. There's multiple components of the Microsoft platform. It's all working in concert. So Sid was able to experience an improved handoff from the previous nurse. He was able to get a variety of AI-powered recommendations from previous notes, and this allowed him to be fully prepared to take care for the patient. He was also able to quickly identify all the equipment that was needed to, for the purposes of his patient. And he was also able to visit his patients remotely when he was working from home and check in on the patient's overall progress. So thank you so much for your time. And remember, you too have the power with Power Platform and Microsoft Teams. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eden. Does anyone else who's part of this section on the Microsoft software have any concluding comments you want to make, Doug or anyone else?
Yeah, let me just sort of wrap up by saying, the goal here was to share some of the technology that goes into the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare. As Gareth was saying this morning, the idea behind what we're doing with the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare is to unify a bunch of technology and capability that exists today in the Microsoft portfolio, as well as we look at these scenarios and look at these different use cases, build additional capability that is potentially missing from this portfolio and bring that together. So that's really the driving force behind creating and releasing the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare. What you saw today was, multiple parts of this coming together and how they work. And this is, as you can imagine, this can be very complicated, and we're trying to simplify that by packaging these things up together. The Azure API for FHIR enables you to unify data from disparate and multiple data sources, bring that together into the Azure platform and make it available for a number of different use cases, including machine learning, artificial intelligence, analytics, things like that. But also has the ability to connect into the Common Data Service and make that data available to a wide selection of other Microsoft technology, including Dynamics and the Power Platform and Teams and some of these other things. And so what you're seeing is the power of the sum of all these parts and what we're able to do by bringing these things together. There's lots of use cases that you'll learn about over time, over the next few months, of different organizations that we've been working with, both at individual levels with these technologies as well as unified levels with these technologies. For example, there's an organization that we worked with that we'll share more about later, but they were working with regional Department of Public Health on their COVID response, and they were able to use things like the FHIR converter to collect data from a wide variety of providers in the region, transform that data into a single standard format in FHIR and bring it into a unified database where they could then do analytics on it and get better insight into what was happening. We have another provider organization in the Northeast that was able to use Azure and the Azure API for FHIR, as well as tools like Azure Search, but then connect that into Power BI and connect that into Teams to create better patient engagement scenarios where clinicians working with patients could, via a Teams interface, pull up that patient data in real time and ask questions of that data, like what was the last medication delivered, how many different things have happened with this patient. And so the ability to start to unify these things and make data much more accessible, not only to providers in the length of care, but at the point of care, and to create better experiences is really what this is all about. As Gareth mentioned earlier, the tagline behind the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare is better experiences, better insight, better care. And we think by bringing these things together, we can provide that and enable that. On October 30th, this comes to general availability. As Gareth mentioned, this is the first sort of wave of what the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare is. And it's very heavily targeted towards providers because that's what we've been working with first. But we're also working very closely with payers and others. In fact, we have I think on the call, there's some of the provider, or excuse me, some of the ISV partners we've been working with that are building solutions in the payer space. We have Dorina Solutions, who's built things for Blue Button. We have Sagitech, who's built some systems for payer scenarios built on our FHIR services and using some of these other technologies. So a bit of a long-winded summary there in closing, but I just want you to understand how all these parts play a role and why the sum of these parts is so powerful and what it can do for you as you look to solve some of these problems in real time in your environment. So with that, I think we're a little ahead of schedule, Ron, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to interject my own perspective. And if you remember what Eden said earlier, everyone's got lots of applications they want to deploy, but no one's got enough developers to do that. In addition, I think this is really the power of what Microsoft's doing. And I see this all the time based on the feedback I get from people coming to AngelBeat, is that in addition to packaging all these solutions, Microsoft makes it very easy for people of all skill levels to develop very powerful AI-powered applications. Let's say you're a PhD data scientist. They've got the ability to customize these applications. Let's say you're a strategic enterprise architect who's not a very big developer. No problem. They've got low code, no code, API-based solutions where once you understand the business or organizational needs, you don't need to have this elaborate Python or C# kind of programming skills to still create those same applications. And maybe Doug, you can comment on this. There's really a suite or range of options depending on whether or not, again, big developer, big hardcore programmer, no problem. You can customize it as easily, as in-depth you want. More strategic architect, no problem again. Just tell us what you're trying to do. And just like you probably can configure the homepage on your smartphone, if you can do that, you can create powerful applications. And I think that's a second major benefit in addition to this combination of previously separate application platforms.
Yeah, Ron, I think you actually summed it up really well in talking about the spectrum that we just showed you, right? We started with, on one end of the spectrum, with the expectation that you have developer resources and you're going to build on this platform, but you have complete customization capability. You can build whatever you want on this platform and bring these things together. And it sort of ties in what Holly and Darren were talking about before, where they had to sort of build these solutions. And as we learn more about those scenarios, building more technology to make those development solutions easier. But then as we progressed into what Rebecca was talking about, we get into something that's more pre-built but highly customizable. You can tailor it to your needs. You can do some more work with it. And then all the way to where Eden was talking about these no-code solutions that really are not dependent on having developer resources available and just really being able to move those things out. So we really covered that whole spectrum here. And in the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, one of the things we're trying to do is solve these problems, but also ensure that we provide enough flexibility that whatever the problem is you're trying to solve, you have the right tools to do that.